how does the stabilization data work if you're using a zoom lens? So Scaleslow Photo writes a comment, I'm so glad you made this video with relation to the Canon R8 Gyroflow versus digital IS enhanced. So I want to get the Canon R8 as a second camera for wide view, main camera for photos. I will use a gimbal most times, but it's nice to have the option to stabilize in post. Looks like the Gyroflow works really well. Question though is, how does the stabilization data work if you're using a zoom lens? For example, in the video I was using a 17 to 55 millimeter. I'm guessing it can work if you calibrate the 17 and 55 millimeter separately? Question mark. I have a 70 to 200 millimeter and I'm curious how to stabilize it. A great question. The example that I'm going to showcase to you is another video that I had shot. Essentially, I am shooting with this here, which is an 80 Canon Canon EF 80 to 200 millimeter magic drain pipe L lens. I think this is one of Canon's first L lenses on the EF system. Beautiful lens, great image quality. When you mount this, I just put a little cold shoe adapter on this thing where I could put like a top handle and use this with like a underslung over like briefcase carry type of setup. So some of the footage I captured here is so essentially it was at 85 millimeters. It's kind of shaky, and I stabilized it using Gyroflow. Now, you are absolutely right. The mindset that you have to take with relation to stabilizing footage on Gyroflow is that when you press record, you have to think like you're shooting at a particular focal length. It forces you, when you shoot, before you shoot rather, it forces you to consider what is the composition. Are you going to shoot wide angle? Are you going to shoot standard? Are you going to shoot telephoto? What is the specific focal length? And you're going to need to know. And there's a couple of things that you need to know with relation to before you use Gyroflow. You're going to need to know exactly the focal length that you shot the footage at. That's number one. And the way that I make note of that is I called it out, and that audio is recorded in the camera. So this way, when I go back into stabilization, I know exactly what the focal length is. Number two, you're going to need to know what the sensor readout speed is in the footage itself. So, and the reason that's going to be important is because the sensor readout speed allows you to also clean up any rolling shutter that the camera might have. Now, depending on how fast or slow the rolling shutter is, your end result is going to vary. But if this number is off, it's actually going to make the rolling shutter worse than what it actually is. So once you have those two pieces of information, then you'll be able to stabilize appropriately in Gyroflow. So consider this your tutorial on how to use Gyroflow with relation to stabilizing footage caught on any camera. I've done a tutorial for this before using the Canon EOS M with Magic Lantern when it comes to stabilizing cinema DNG footage, but that was a little bit more involved. This is actually going to be a bit simpler because the footage is you shot it, it's ready to stabilize. So what I want you to do is go to gyroflow.xyz, and then from here I want you to go ahead and download the latest version. Right now we have version 1.5. and go ahead and download that. Once you download, extract it into some folder on your system. I'm using Windows. And so once you download it and extract that, I want you to fire it up, right? This is what it's gonna look like when it's fired up. First you gotta do is open your file, figure out which clip that you want to stabilize. So in my case, this is the park footage. So I go find out where the footage is with relation to the park. I am stabilizing image number, clip number 30. Right, that footage is opened up. Now you'll see that it looks kind of flat because it's not graded. It's recorded in C-Log 3. And then from there, I go to open file for the motion data. Now from here, I know that motion data. So when I record footage on the Insta360, so I'm recording in 5.3K because I have the 1-inch Leica edition right here. What this does is it records two files. It records a 5.3K file as well as a lower resolution proxy file. Now, both files store gyro data. And so for the purposes of gyroscopic data, I will record. For the purpose of gyroscopic data, I will just pull the proxy file. And so from here, I have two folders, Insta Proxy, open that up, and then I'm going to go to the appropriate file that corresponds with the footage I was recorded. Now, just a heads up, when it comes to recording the footage, press record on your Insta360 or your GoPro, whatever you're using for capturing your gyro data first, and then shortly thereafter you press record on your camera. So this way they're relatively close to each other. When it comes to syncing, I'm going to show you how to do that. So we go to 65, which is the appropriate file. Now you'll notice is right down here, you will have footage data which showcases all your information with relation to the yaw, the pitch, the rotation or roll, or pan, tilt, and roll. But in this case, because this is used for like drone and piloting, the terminology that they're using is yaw, pitch, and roll. I believe roll is the appropriate term, but roll or rotation, they both start with R. Anyway, once you do that, the way that I go about doing this is to rather keep it simple. Now, we talked about the lens profile. Now, what I did, I like to keep my focal lengths that I'm shooting at standard focal lengths. So things like 24, 28, 35, 50, 85 millimeter. I usually don't go above 85. And when it comes to stabilizing footage on, say, something like a zoom lens where you shot at, say, maybe 80 or 85 millimeters and 200 millimeters, then it's one thing that I've noticed is that still stabilize it at 85 millimeters, even if you're looking at 200 millimeters. Because at that point, once you get to 85 millimeters and beyond, or 70 millimeters and beyond, well, there is a difference between the performance and the results between 70 and 85. But once you get to like 85 millimeters and beyond, doesn't matter if you're stabilizing at 200, I have found that the results are similar, and I'll show you. So one thing that you'll notice here, right? You have some crazy movement data here, and then you have like very little movement data here. The way that I treat telephoto stabilization is it's like you're not gonna run around, and if you do move in terms of like walking forward or panning, not even panning, but trucking sideways or sliding sideways, left and right, you're gonna try to do it as cautiously as possible, in the sense that you might do a ninja walk or something like that. And so, and what it does is that you get some very good results. But let me first go ahead and pick my lens profile. At this point, I'm going to pick 85 millimeter, and I will pick, now you see a bunch of options come up. It's not really important what comes up. Just make sure that the resolution corresponds with the resolution that you shot at, and the focal length corresponds with what you shot at, right? So in this case, I have, and the footage and the camera that's being captured with is a full frame camera. So in this case, we have like a Sigma FP 85 millimeters. That's one option. We got an A7C at 4K 85 millimeters. So let's go ahead. Nope, that's not A7, that's A6100. 85 millimeters, and it corresponds with the frame rate. So let's go with that one, right? You have the option of calibrating your camera and your lens combination in here, but this is not the scope of that tutorial. I just wanted to pick something that, in terms of focal length and the actual composition with relation to the full frame or not, that's going to become really important. Now, I've got the information there. Then I'm going to go into this area, which is all about synchronization. For gyro offset, I set that to like 5 seconds. Synchronization search size about 5 seconds. Time to analyze about 5 seconds. You could do it more or less, but 5 seconds for me has been a good sweet spot. When it comes to the stabilization information, field of view, keep it at 1.0. And this is where it's going to be something you want to pay attention to. Right, generally speaking, when it comes to the smoothness at pitch, yaw, and roll, yep, I was actually correct. Pitch, yaw, and roll. I just set the around here, about and which is the numbers are corresponding 0.14, 0.17, 0.2, between 0.14 and 0.2, right? And then when it comes to max smoothness at high velocity, set that to anywhere between 0.05 and 0.08. Any more than that, you're going to get a really heavy crop. The other one is max smoothness. I keep that under 0.1 seconds. Then the next one is with relation to zooming speed. So as you move the camera, you're gonna need to crop into the image a little bit more. And so you can choose dynamic zooming and you can choose static zooming, but I'll show you the effect of that in a moment. Now is the rolling shutter correction, right? I selected rolling shutter and this thing comes out. This is where knowing your camera's rolling shutter sensor readout speed comes in handy. Now, in the case of the Canon R8, shooting at, what was the frame rate that this was shot at? This was shot at 60 frames a second. So when you're shooting the Canon R8 at 4K 60, your sensor readout speed is 15.2 milliseconds, right? This is going to come in really, this is going to be important because that's information you need to correct the rolling shutter. Once you got all that information dialed in, then I go into synchronization. What I like to do is I like to pick the area between the smooth and between, before around smooth to where it gets a little janky here, right? So, and in this case, I will look at what's known as the green axis or even the blue axis, but I look at them individually and you can just simply enable and disable it. So the one on the right side here is essentially what the camera is what the software is able to detect through the analysis. And the one on the left side here is the gyro data that's already in Insta360. So you right click, I go on to auto sync here, and it will auto sync this area, give or take about 5 seconds, which is what I had selected in the earlier part. So as it starts synchronizing, you'll notice that some of this data, like the graph, matches a pattern here. So I'll just go ahead and click cancel. I don't need for it to match all of that. And this is where I will manually sync it. So add a manual sync point. And then from here, if I need the gyro data to move to the left, then it's going to be a negative offset. So I go to negative, let's say 300. Nope, we need to add a little bit more. Negative 900. Nope, negative 1500. We're getting there. Negative 1900. We might have overshot. Now at that point, I select and then I drag to the point where it matches the data that I am looking to synchronize with. And boom, there you go. Look how nicely it matches. Now it's not completely synced yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and drag that and zoom in. You could zoom. I zoomed in just by scrolling on the mouse wheel. And there's a few other controls that allow you to kind of quickly move through. So if you press and hold control and turn your mouse wheel, then it'll allow you to move left and right. If you press alternate, it'll allow you to increase or decrease the wavelength. And if you just zoom in and out through the thing, or if you want to zoom in and out, you just, without pressing anything, you move the mouse wheel. And so I just want to synchronize this a little bit more closer. I think that's pretty close. Let me also look at the yaw, right? So I know the yaw and the pitch are most definitely matching, right? As you look at here, I zoom in, the gyro data and the analysis that the software did of the footage, they look close enough. And so from here, let me go to where the footage is at, and let me go to a static. Actually, let me turn off zooming, no zooming at all, right? And you'll notice something. You'll notice if I turn off the boom and I press play, you'll notice that the footage is being stabilized. If I turn that off so I can see, like, there's the offset. And suddenly everything that just goes crazy. Obviously, this footage here is not usable. So in a case like this is where I'll do no zooming. And I'll just change my field of view to something like 0.8. And there you go. The footage is super smooth. Now, some parts of the data here is red. And those are the parts essentially where the stabilization is going off the scale. Now, I would do some dynamic zooming, but because I'm so far cropped in, not cropped in, I'm so far zoomed in, any little movement is going to be magnified. And so therefore, the only parts of the footage that are really usable for me are these static parts. And this is what it looks like. This is what it's actually stabilizing in regards to the movement. Same thing on this side over here. As my son is walking away, you'll notice I'm just standing in one spot trying to hold this thing. And the moment I get to an area where I have to move around a little bit or pan too much, boom, as you can see, it just goes crazy. So these are only the clips I can use. And this is something to always be cognizant of. When you're at like 70 millimeters, 85 millimeters, 200 millimeters, you want to stay in one place and you want to move, or like you don't want to move too much, right? And if you do move, like move forward and just kind of do a ninja walk, and you'll get a result like this. You might start like this, but then this is how it's going to end up looking. Now, it's a little bit different if you're dealing with footage that is at a wider angle, right? So in this case, this clip right here was shot, let's see, if I go to the, this is another clip that was shot at 40 millimeters, right? And I open up the file, both the original video, and then I go to my proxy files, the gyro data right here, boom, right? And then I look at the appropriate focal length, which is 40 millimeters. And I find find one here, Sigma 40 millimeters 1.4, not the exact length, but it is full frame and it is the appropriate focal length. So I go ahead and select that. And then from here, I go down and ensure that my rolling shutter is set right. In this case, it's going to be 15.2 again. And then instead of no zooming, I'll do dynamic zooming. And you'll notice right here, based on the amount of activity, the software will set the zoom. So with a lot of activity, there's a lot of zoom. With very little activity in terms of movement, then there's very little zoom. So I want to synchronize this information. So let's go ahead. Let's go to auto sync here. I'm going to let it analyze the footage a little bit. As the footage is analyzing, once it gets to an area where I can kind of visually map things out, there you go, it's starting to flatten out here. So this part right here matches up with the highlighted part over here. I'll just go ahead and click cancel. Add a manual sync point. I want to move the gyro data's footage offset to be back a little bit. So minus, let's say 300. Yeah, that's about close. Let's see, 500 maybe? 500 is probably closer. Yep, 500 almost on the dot right here. Now I go ahead and just select the cursor and then drag until it lines up accordingly. And then once it's matched up, let me go ahead and press Alt and raise the frequency so that I can see things a little bit better. Let's go here to the crazy part. And then let me just adjust things just a little bit. That looks about, yeah, there you go. I think that's about right. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that you'll see some like yellow dots on the screen. That's basically showcasing, I guess, the software stabilizing it, right? And so we're going from this is the movement of the camera, and the final footage itself, this is what it kind of looks like. And so you'll notice it's a little skippy because it's 4K 60, so the computer kind of lags a little bit when it comes to the playback. But the final footage this is what it ends up looking like when it's fully rendered and graded, or simple grade, not even graded. It's just I applied the Canon LUT so I can get the appropriate colors. So this is 40 millimeters, and you'll notice, coming back to this, at 40 millimeters, I set the zooming to be dynamic, right? The zooming speed, dynamic zooming. My field of view is at 1.0. And so with dynamic zooming, I set the zoom speed to be about 10 seconds. So whatever the movement is gonna gradually zoom to keep up with my movement. So, and what it's doing essentially, the zoom is a digital zoom, is essentially cropping in a little bit better, a little bit more. And so anytime there's any kind of movement, then that's when it's gonna crop digitally. And so, but this is the kind of footage that you get. It looks smooth in comparison to the original footage, where I'm trying to keep it as smooth as possible, but neither of the lens is stabilized, nor is there any stabilization in camera. If there was, I disabled it. And so in the end, when it comes to stabilizing using Gyroflow with a camera such as a Canon R8, then whenever you shoot, and this is a good habit to have, is that when you shoot, you want to know exactly the focal length that you're shooting. Go and when you press record and you stop recording that focal length. So if you want to change lenses, essentially when you zoom, you're changing the lens. And that's the mindset that you want to have. This is different than when using a Sony camera. With Sony camera, using Catalyst Browse, the software is doing everything. You can zoom in and out, crash zoom if you'd like, and all of that information is, in addition to the gyroscopic data within a Sony camera, is already being recorded. So when you use Catalyst Browse, you don't have to worry about that, it's all there. Whereas with gyro stabilization for Gyroflow using a Canon camera with like an Insta360, then you're gonna have to have that mindset. And besides, even like when you shoot with the focal length and you cut with whatever the focal length was, it forces you to be more mindful with relation to the footage that you're capturing. And it's necessary to know what you shot at to be able to stabilize in Gyroflow. So hope you found value here. Hope this is helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I'll see you soon.